Hey there. Let's cover syntax details now that we've explored some of the basics. First, let's cover when you should use semicolons. To answer this, we're going to need a better understanding of what a statement is in JavaScript. I've been talking about statements in the previous videos, but I haven't really given a definition yet, since the definition requires you having some context. So, a JavaScript statement, roughly speaking, performs an action. This action may fall within different categories. First, there are declaration statements. We saw that with the var keyword to make variables. The second category is around control flow. We achieve that with the if and switch statements. There's another category based on iterations, and we'll get into that as we take a look at loops. Next, there's a category around functions. As mentioned before, this is a large subject, so we're going to have a whole section on functions later. Now, the essential question is, when should you use a semicolon? The rule of thumb is that you add a semicolon after every statement. For example, add the semicolon when you declare a variable. Execute a console.log. Use the break keyword. But the exception, though, is that you omit the semicolon after a block of code. Don't add the semicolon after the pair of curly braces for an if statement or a switch statement, for example. Now, you may find resources out there that describe the rule of using a semicolon after every statement as closer to an actual guideline than a law. Now, it's true you can choose to omit semicolons for the most part, but if you follow the rule of using a semicolon after every single statement, your code is going to be consistent with the majority of JavaScript examples and projects you find online. Let's go ahead and jump back into Replit. This is the code sample that was left off in the last video. Notice that there's semicolons everywhere. There's semicolons after the var declaration, the console.logs, and the break statements. But technically, we can remove all of these. So if you take out the semicolons, and I'll do it for one break statement, if you go ahead and run the entire program, well, the output is the same. JavaScript isn't requiring you to use the semicolons. So for the most part, they seem optional. But this actually isn't entirely true. Semicolons are relevant when you need to use multiple statements on one line. For example, on the same line where this foo variable is declared, well, we can declare a second variable called bar. Let's set it to 17. Except instead of using semicolons, let's go ahead and omit the semicolons, and let's see what happens. So click the green button, and actually there's a shortcut to run the actual Replit program. You can use Command Enter or Control Enter, depending if you're on Mac or Windows. On Mac, it's Command. On Windows, it's Control. When you run this, you should find that there is an error. The main reason you need semicolons then is to distinguish statements that appear on the same line. Now, this example may seem a little fabricated or far-fetched. Why would you write JavaScript code like this when you can declare the variables on their own lines? But as the video on loops will reveal later, having multiple statements on one line is actually pretty common in JavaScript. So overall, it's a best practice to stay consistent and use semicolons throughout your code. Place them after statements, but again, not after the curly braces for blocks of code. Okay, while we're on the topic of syntax, let's also briefly go over comments. Comments are lines of code that the program doesn't care about. They're meant only for the programmer, and the JavaScript engine ignores the comments when executing the program. To write a comment, use two slashes, so we can put a comment after these variables of bears, beats, Battlestar, Galactica. You use comments to add useful notes about your code. They're especially helpful to explain how something complicated is working. If you have a comment that spans multiple lines, you can use the /** syntax, which should close with a star and a slash as well, and you can write the comment on multiple lines. So here we have the same comment of bears, beats, Battlestar Galactica. In reality, though, you'll often see multi-line comments that have each line done with the double slash syntax, even though they're on multiple lines. And this is because if you write out bears beats Battlestar Galactica, if you do a command or control slash, you'll find that it automatically creates a comment out of the entire chunk of code. All right. This, along with semicolons, puts a wrap on this video about syntax. Next, let's go over that special value that the REPL keeps printing over and over again: undefined.